I'm Bill Kassel, and this is Free Expression. This program is all about conveying the Christian message from a Catholic point of view and defending the liberty which makes it possible to do that. We talk with creative, interesting people about homeschooling your kids confidently and about what it takes for ideas to influence public policy. Join us, sit back and enjoy some free expression. Annie Holmquist is an astute observer of the current scene. You may have encountered her writing in the Epic Times or in the online journal Intellectual Takeout, where she served as editor. Her Substack feature, Annie's Attic, pays special attention to the trials and triumphs of living. In a recent article, she examined the challenges of homeschooling. She observed that a lot of parents who've taken their children's education in hand, especially homeschooling moms, live with the fear that they may be shortchanging their kids. They're trying to rescue them from failing school systems and shield them from the perverse ideas that have taken hold in classrooms today, but they're not really sure they're up to the task. Annie, I suspect that this is a very common fear. Thanks for taking time to discuss it with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Yes, I would say, not always, but definitely I've seen this quite a few times over the years where mothers feel very inadequate about teaching. They really want to do the best for their kids, but they just don't feel that they can do it themselves, and so they wonder, should I put them in private school? Should I put them in public school? Not sure about this, but I actually think sometimes if mothers are unsure about if they're doing a good job, that's actually probably a good indicator that they actually really are doing a good job.
Is this a realistic thing, or are we just kind of overwhelmed by the propaganda that seems to tell us that schools are special places and teachers are experts and all of that?
I think that is very much a real thing. Teachers tend to say, I have gone to school for this, and of course they think that they know a lot, but there's really great value in a parent. They have love and care for their child. Again, like I said before, they want to do the best for them. And they are actually the one that is closest to their child. They know their child the best. They know how their child ticks. So I think that they can really have probably the most insight into how that child learns, what that child needs to succeed.
It is a challenge, though. I mean, when you consider being responsible for your child's, not only their upbringing, but also their formal teaching, I can see where that would produce some anxiety.
Yes, definitely. Everybody in the world is telling you, you need to do this, you need to do that. This is what you need to do to make your child succeed. And I think what we forget a lot of times is that schooling and education is very basic. What you really just need to do is give your child the basic building blocks that will help them to learn well, that they can continue to build upon that foundation over the years. But you also just need to give them a real love for learning. A lot of times, if they are in an institutional school like the public schools, that really kills the desire for learning. It gives them a cookie-cutter education. If they are very smart, they are pulled back. If they struggle in school, they are put down even more, or they put themselves down. When you are teaching your child on your own, I think you actually have that chance to give them the unique education, and it really helps them succeed, just because it's also combined with the love and the attention of a parent.
In the early days of the homeschool movement, which I guess would probably be back in like the 70s or the 80s, I think parents had to improvise quite a bit. But over the years, a lot of materials have been developed for homeschooling. Whole curricula have been introduced into the market. So I would assume that makes the homeschooling mothers a lot easier. But how do you discern what's the best materials for your kid? Which curriculum suits them best? That has to be kind of a job in itself.
My parents were some of those early homeschool pioneers, and we started in the 1980s. And back then, there were probably about 3 curriculum options that you could do. And my mom actually looks back and she says, I'm kind of glad that there are only 3 because I would have been overwhelmed by the choices. So in a sense, that is a detriment to some extent because there are so many choices out there. But it's also a great thing because parents can be flexible, look around, get ideas, see what fits their child best, and try different things out. And that is what is really neat today about the education freedom movement that's kind of sweeping the nation, especially since COVID. You just have many more options. And kids don't have to stay in that public school. They don't have to go to a private school if it doesn't work for them. We have micro schools popping up. It just gives parents much more flexibility, options. Yes, it does take work that they have to figure out what is the best for their child, but they are also just much broader in the options that are out there, and that's really great for everybody.
I've interacted with a lot of homeschool kids, and it's been my observation that they generally have their act together. They seem more mature, more self-confident, and yet we keep hearing that they're at a disadvantage. A lot of people will insist that homeschool kids are isolated, they're off by themselves, they don't have opportunities to make friendships and interact socially. What's your take on all that?
As a homeschool child myself, I always say, okay, sure. Of course you're going to get that what about socialization question. My dad even said that before we started homeschooling. He thought homeschooling was the craziest thing ever. And he said, what about socialization? And he quickly found, as we started doing it, that, okay, so you're going to have there's going to be awkward students no matter what school you're in. There's awkward kids in the public schools. There are awkward kids in private schools. Yes, there are awkward kids in homeschools. The thing is, with homeschooling, I think it actually prepares kids for the real world because they are interacting with adults much more. They are interacting with their siblings of all ages. And if you're in a traditional classroom, you are just interacting with all your same-age peers. Now, when you go on later in life and you're in the business world, you're going to have to know how to interact with people who are 10, 20, 30 years older or younger than you. And if you're not comfortable with that, you just don't know how to fit in, how to adjust and everything. So I found that in my own homeschool education that it really wasn't difficult. I mean, sure, you had to overcome shyness, but as you get older, and it's very easy to adjust. I think a lot of times it doesn't take a lot. And then, too, there are so many opportunities out there these days. It's not like homeschool kids are isolated. You're almost going to have to try really, really hard if you want to isolate your children. There are many co-ops. You have church events. You have community events, sports events. There are many ways that you can get your children out there interacting with people, having fellowship with others. I think a lot of times the whole socialization, isolation argument is just a myth because people don't really know what else to throw at homeschoolers because a lot of times their scores are doing well and they're succeeding. So they just say, oh, you're not with other children. Of course, you must not know how to interact with society.
Well, what's your bottom line advice to parents who may be considering homeschooling?
I am a big proponent of it, and I definitely encourage people to do that. One thing I'm telling people now is I have been doing a lot of education research in my own state, which I'm actually from Minnesota. We are finding that scores are plummeting quite a bit, especially in the last few years since COVID, but even before that. It's not just this COVID phenomena. The schools seem to be getting dumbed down naturally as the years go by. In my state, there's a statewide proficiency in reading of about 50%, so only about half the kids read. A lot of other states are similar. So I'm starting, homeschooling used to be like, oh, get your kids out of the schools if you don't like the values, what they're teaching on a religious nature or just sex ed, everything like that. I think that is still a big issue, but now I'm looking at it saying, even if you don't care about all those values issues, you should get your children out of public schools on an academic basis alone. Because the scores are so terrible, honestly, I look at it and say, how can you keep your kids in these failing schools? A lot of times what's happening is schools are just passing them through. They graduate, parents think, oh, everything's great. And then the kids get to college and they have to take all kinds of remedial education because they never learned. That's abusive, really, if you think about it. You're giving kids an idea that they can do it. They're going on to college and then they're getting into debt when they have to take all this remedial education and they're going to have nothing to show for it. With that, yes, I definitely think you can even make the case on an academic basis alone that it's great to homeschool. But even now, more so than 10, 20, 30 years ago, you are having definitely the values issues where you're having gender ideology, social emotional learning, which is kind of has Marxist underpinnings. I think you need to think about, if you're considering homeschooling, like, how do I want my child to turn out? Do I want to give them a chance? Do I want to pass on my beliefs to them? Do I want to make sure they don't wash out, or do I not care? If you don't really care, then it's like, fine, just send them to normal school, have that traditional option that we've had for many years, just keep up with the status quo. But if you want something better for them, I think you really need to consider homeschooling. Yes, it's a sacrifice, but I think it's really a worthwhile one. Like I said, I was homeschooled myself, and I am so thankful that my parents did it, and it just gave me a different mentality and on life, and gave me a stronger Christian worldview. It also gave me the ability to think outside the box. Common sense is really not very common anymore, but I think being homeschooled gave me that common sense that so many in this society have lost today.
Well, how can people follow your writing? Where are you located on the web these days?
I am at the Epic Times. I write there somewhat regularly. I also write on my Substack, which is Annie's Attic, and I also work for Opportunity for All Kids, or OAK, which is a state-based organization encouraging education savings accounts in my state of Minnesota. So I write at all three of those places.
Annie Holmquist, thanks very much. This is certainly an issue that a lot of parents are confronting now, and your words of encouragement are timely and well received.
Thank you for having me.
It's said that ideas have consequences, but not all ideas are taken seriously. Have you ever noticed how some become prominent while others get pushed to the side? How do political leaders determine which proposals they should support or make part of their campaigns? For that matter, how is it that some thoughts get tagged as completely unacceptable, never to be voiced in polite company? The Mackinac Center for Public Policy has studied this phenomenon using a concept called the Overton Window. Joe Lehman is president of that Michigan-based organization, and we turn to him now to tell us how it all works. Joe, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's great to be on the program. The Overton Window is simply a model of policy change that helps us understand why some policies, some public policies, some laws and government rules that we live under, why some are just considered as natural as the air that we breathe, and why some are considered controversial and beyond the pale, and why those things can change from time to time.
All right. Now, the national conversation includes a lot of stuff: the environment, diversity and inclusiveness, gender issues, immigration, a whole bunch of stuff. And there are different factions that are lobbying for various points of view. How does the Overton Window prioritize the different approaches and sort of create a logic that a politician or a journalist can follow?
Yeah, good question. The things that you mentioned, lobbyists and interest groups and different factions pushing for their point of view. Those are all important, and those all do shape the laws and public policies that we end up living under. But none of them are the whole picture. When we use the term the Overton window, we chose the word window intentionally because a window gives you a way to get a glimpse outside that has boundaries. You have a top of the window and a bottom of the window, and you have sides on the window, and you can't see things that are outside those boundaries of the window, if you will. The thing that the Overton window reveals is which policies are politically acceptable at any point in time. And that is shaped not just by the lobbyists, not just by the factions, not just by individual politicians, but it is ultimately shaped by what will society accept. Now, we're talking about government in a democracy where in some sense, the people have the final say. They get to vote people in and out of office. So in a democracy, what the people will accept or what they want is eventually what comes into view through the Overton window when policy changes.
So these are the accepted options that a politician can choose between. If I have a proposal, if I'm pushing a new cause, how do I get my ideas into the window?
Yeah, that's another excellent question. Think of all of the great social movements in our country. And when I say great, I don't mean to apply any value judgment to them. We may not agree with all of the social movements that the country has sort of adopted and made its own.
Sure.
But we can still say that they've been great in the sense that social movements have had a big effect on society. Of course, a huge social movement was for the abolition of slavery. That's one that universally accepted. No one would dare to propose publicly that we should return to a time when slavery is still practiced. We have the civil rights movement, which was another huge movement. We have the temperance movement, which gave us prohibition. We have the environmental movement. We have the union movement. We have the gay marriage movement. We have the drug legalization movement. We have the abortion movement. These are all movements that shifted the Overton window. Let's pick one that's, say, abortion. We can easily recall a time, if you're my age, I'm 60 years old, I can imagine I lived in a time when the idea of abortion was highly controversial. It took Supreme Court action to change policies regarding abortion. Abortion was, I think, among the states universally outlawed. It took a Supreme Court decision to change that. But what you had driving this was a social movement of people who wanted more access to abortion. And again, we don't have to agree or disagree that was a good or bad thing.
No, I understand.
But this is how it happened. And so you had voices that were very powerful and intentionally tried to move public opinion in the direction that abortion should be more acceptable. And then that eventually becomes codified by a Supreme Court decision, and then we have that court decision thrown out recently or overturned. But public opinion, still remains more accepting of abortion than it was, say, 60 years ago.
Well, let's take another issue. Let's look at the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement involved a great deal of direct action, bus boycotts, sitting in at lunch counters, all kinds of things. And the people who participated in that put their lives on the line in a very real way. They were quite heroic. But I've often observed that the civil rights movement would not have succeeded if those folks had not been able to move the public conscience. They had to sell the American people in general on the rightness of their cause. How did that take place? How do you make a change like that in the overall public perception?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's really important to note that the civil rights movement did not begin with some politicians standing up and saying, "Hear me, O people. It is time to change our thinking in the direction of being more accepting of people from all races, creeds, and colors." It did not begin with a politician.
Right.
It ended with politicians making that kind of a proclamation. And so it was exactly what you said, Bill, that started the movement. It was people themselves who did everything from taking direct action, and of course you had more prominent leaders who would bring powerful rhetoric and logic and reason to the civil rights debate. I'm thinking about Martin Luther King and, dozens and dozens of others who made that case in the public square. The key thing to remember is politicians didn't lead the way on this. They merely ratified what the politicians believed the public began to expect, what they thought that the public would demand. And the reason is because politicians who stray too far outside the Overton window find themselves to be ex-politicians. They get unelected. Take women's suffrage, for example. If you go back 110 years, women could not vote anywhere in the country. This was just considered the way that things were. Women had not been able to vote. There were all kinds of arguments made why we would not want women to vote, how it was actually good for women that they be protected from the responsibility of voting. But women and others, it's important to note, made other arguments. It actually would be good for the country if women also could vote. So now, 110 years later, try to imagine any politician running on a platform of that women should not be allowed to vote.
Right.
Well, that person would be an ex-politician pretty quickly.
What's the origin of this name, Overton Window? How did that come about?
The name Overton Window comes from a man named Joe Overton. Joe was the senior vice president at the Mackinac Center. He was my friend and colleague, and he developed a concept to help explain what think tanks do. The Mackinac Center is a think tank, and so we needed to have a way to explain the work that we do. And so he came up with a very academic-sounding notion called the window of political possibilities. Joe himself never called it the Overton window, but he was describing exactly the same thing we're talking about here today. In fact, he even mocked up a little brochure and wrote a little bit about this idea. Joe would actually give training in what the window is and how it can be shifted. When we would train think tank executives from around the country and around the world, we trained think tank executives and professionals for years and years at the Mackinac Center in Midland, Michigan. Well, Joe was tragically killed in 2003. His colleagues, including me, we decided to help honor his memory by changing the name of his concept, the window of political possibilities. We simply said, well, let's call that the Overton window from now on.
Okay.
And that idea took hold. Plus, it's shorter, so it's better in that way, too.
Right. Well, now the Mackinac Center is very much engaged in getting important ideas into the window. Tell us a little bit about your work.
The Mackinac Center was founded in 1987. We have been working to shift public policy, shift the laws. In Michigan, we're primarily focused on Michigan. We've been focused on that for more than 35 years. Some of our most notable efforts, and I guess I would say achievements, have been when we helped Michigan become a right-to-work state. Mm-hmm. Now, that right-to-work law has been repealed, but that's just evidence that Michigan is a battleground state. Right-to-work, of course, is the idea that no one should be forced to join a labor union or pay dues or fees to a union,
right,
unless they consent to that. But the Mackinac Center has been the intellectual or the academic voice behind the idea that government should be as small as possible to get the job done. That government should be respectful of civil rights. And in other words, that government in general should just be limited and should not be the instrument of first resort to solve some problem. Government should be the instrument of last resort. Well, we can look at Detroit and Detroit's schools. When the Mackinac Center opened its doors, no school-age child in Detroit could attend school outside the public school system that they were assigned to, unless the parents had enough money to pay tuition at a private school. Well, now, because the Mackinac Center has championed the idea of parental choice in education, not government choosing where a kid goes, but the parents choosing where a kid goes. Now, more than half of school children who live in Detroit actually go to school somewhere outside the Detroit public school system. They might attend a charter school somewhere or take some other option that's outside Detroit public schools because they believe that's better. And that's an example of the Overton Window in action. The Mackinac Center advocated for parental choice strongly. We made the case, and when lawmakers sensed that the people wanted it, they passed a law.
Well, where can people find out more about your work? How can they contact the Mackinac Center?
Yeah, the easiest way is our website, which is mackinac.org. And Michigan residents, of course, know that Mackinac is spelled with a C at the end instead of a W. But even if you misspell it with a W, you'll get to the right place. So mackinac.org is the place to go for more information.
Joe Lehman, thanks very much for talking with us and delving into this concept of the Overton Window. It's something that affects all of us. We're all part of this comprehensive decision-making process that's going on all the time.
Yeah, that's the idea that we want people to walk away with. Ideas and laws don't just come out of nowhere with us having no ability to influence them. In the United States, we have the ability to drive social movements that can drive durable policy change. And if we don't drive durable policy change in the direction we want, there will be others who drive it in the other way.
Be with us next time when we explore other aspects of religious communication and look deeper into the great Christian heritage of free expression. Free Expression with Bill Kassel is a production of Good Shepherd Catholic Radio and Company Publications, where good books, good music, and good radio are always good company. Dan Curris provided technical assistance. Theme and incidental music are by Dan Adam. The program was produced and directed by Bill Kassel. This is Good Shepherd Catholic Radio.